Hi everybody, GT here from GT's Barbecue. I've had quite a few requests, probably 5 or 6, from some of my friends and family about brisket. Many of them have never done a brisket before. I don't profess to be a pit master or a brisket master, but I've done quite a few of these. They come out really good. I get a lot of compliments on my brisket, so I'm going to do my very best to show my basic backyard brisket. I am going to inject. You don't really need to do that for a backyard cook, but I'm going to go ahead and show it anyway in case you decide you want to, and I'll just do a basic trim on it. So I'm going to get this thing out. It's actually been in the freezer for about 30 minutes. It's a good idea to get that meat as cold as possible. It really makes it easier to trim up and cut off some of the surface fat. So I'm going to get that thing out, get prepped, and we'll see here in a minute. Okay, so what I have here is an 18.5 pound Angus brisket. The different grades of meat you're typically going to find in a store are Select being the lowest, Choice in the middle, and then Prime. Each is going to cost a little more. The Angus cut is considered to be the highest grade of the Choice level, so the middle. So it's one step below Prime. You're going to save a lot of money on these, and if you cook it right, I'm not sure you can tell any difference. One of the things you want to look for, this particular brisket has a nice thick flat. So by flat, I mean you have two muscles here. We have the flat, and then we have the point. They both go in a little bit different grain direction. But you're going to want to trim off some of this fat and silver skin on the top. And this piece of fat on here, it's called the decal. It's really hard. It's never going to render down, so we're always going to cut that out. Sometimes I go ahead and separate the flat from the point. The point is going to be where burn ends come from. In this case, because it's a backyard cook, I'm just going to go ahead and cook them both together. One of the challenges of doing that is obviously you have a much thicker piece of meat here and a much thinner piece of meat here. So you want to getting them done at the same time can be challenging. And brisket, you know, it's meat and it's heat. You put it on, you cook it. To get a good brisket, though, in my opinion, it's one of the most challenging cooks in barbecue. So I have a couple of different knives here. I have a pretty stout boning knife, and I have a fillet knife, which is much better for trimming off some of this surface skin. So I'm going to start out here and just cut this decal, this big chunk kernel out of here, and basically you can see and feel where it is. We're just kind of going to go like so. And again, I had this in the freezer for a little while. Sorry if my hand's a little bit in the way. And it really makes it easier for unless you have a really nice knife, a lot easier to cut through this fat and get rid of it. So I'm just going to go through like so, take out this big ugly piece of hard fat, get rid of it like so. This fat line in here, this is kind of part of where the point and the flat come together. It's if you feel bold, you can go ahead and separate these two, just kind of follow that line. But once this thing cooks, once you put your knife in here, it's just going to follow that fat line. It's going to be really easy to separate these. The point is a much fattier meat. You can see the marbling in there. It's always going to be more tender. And we're going to make burn ends out of this cook. So, and I can kind of in here feel a little bit more of that hard fat. So we're just going to cut some of that out of there. Get rid of that. This is kind of a brisket 101, so I'm sure many of you already know how to trim a brisket. This is called a full packer brisket, meaning it's all together. Basically, anytime a butcher touches a piece of meat, it's going to cost more. So if you buy it whole like this, you're going to save a lot of money. Just a little bit more in there. Can't really do it wrong. kind of get in there and cut some of that out. You'll start to feel it a little bit softer the deeper you go. And again, we're probably going to separate this. We are going to separate this after it's cooked anyway. So that's not going to hurt a thing. Oh yeah, that feels nice and soft in there. And I usually like to try to work the top as much as possible before I flip it over and start to work on the bottom. I can feel this right here. It's a little bit hard. And I am going to cook this fat side down. Don't even get me started on the controversies, fat side up or fat side down, but basically you want the fat to be pointed towards wherever your heat source comes from. So I'm going to do this on a pellet grill today. So the heat's going to be coming from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and cook it fat side down. Some people think if you cook it fat side up, the fat will melt down and baste the meat as it cooks. There may be some validity to that, but basically I just leave it on to protect the meat from the heat. I'm not going to go crazy on this, but you can see the difference here between the point and the flat. The grain's kind of going this way on the point. It's going this way on the flat. So we'll kind of get rid of some of this surface fat and silver skin. Just kind of carve under it. And again, it really makes it, the colder the better. I put it in the freezer for about a half hour. Really makes it easier to get this top part off. Kind of pick up on it. And go to town. So I'm not going to force you to sit here and watch me do this entire thing. I'm going to join you here in a few minutes, but basically we're just going to go across this whole top part and get rid of this kind of stuff as much as possible, and then we'll get on with the trim here in a minute. Okay, I've got most of this silver skin off. Silver skin is this kind of translucent layer. You can drive yourself crazy trying to get every little speck of this off. It's not that big a deal. But for the most part, I've gotten all the big clumps of fat off of there. And it's going to accept seasoning well. Again, you can clearly see the grain of this running this way. And you can kind of see all the extra marbling in the point down in here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over. Trying to figure out which is the best way for you to see what I'm doing here. So this is called the fat cap, and basically it's a layer of fat. You need a little bit of fat for flavor. It's going to protect the brisket when it cooks. One of the things you can also kind of see here is it's a little bit gray. It's a little bit gray along here because when they process this meat, they hit it with steam, and you can leave it on. It doesn't really hurt anything. But I usually like to go ahead and kind of square this thing up as much as possible without too much waste. So I'm just going to go along the edge here and take off that little piece like so. This stuff makes really good sausage. If you want to keep it, I don't happen to have a grinder, so I usually don't. This particular brisket was $55, so it's all in all not too bad. And I'm going to go ahead and try to trim this off so it's about a 1/2 inch thick, as evenly as possible going across here. And again, you can see why it's good that it's cold. And it's also good to round these edges off. Anything that's got a sharp corner is going to have a tendency to burn. So I'm just going to go along here, get the knife under it, trim-a-roo. I know this may be boring to some of you. You've seen it 100 times, so feel free to fast forward at this point. And we'll get on to the seasoning next. Again, I've got an edge there. You never should cut towards yourself. I'm trying to keep the camera angle right. I'm going to round this off as much as I can. Get it started, pull it up, and then just follow the line that you want. So it's more of a curve. It really makes a difference when you go to slice it. So that's looking pretty good on that edge. Go along over here. Got the point meat there. I'm going to trim off a little bit more right in here. Like so. Some people will even buy a brisket on sale and just chop the entire thing up and just grind it into hamburger meat. Makes really good hamburger meat. So we're going to kind of go in here, and we have another big piece of fat here. It's kind of hard. We don't want that. We don't want to cut into the meat any more than we have to. But you kind of get what I'm saying. Go along. Take a peek at it. There's a little bit of hard fat here on the side where the point comes into the flat. Sorry you can't see that. But basically just feel it with your hands. And if you feel something that you don't think you'd want to put in your mouth, chances are you should cut it off. And again, there's no wrong way to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to work on this bottom side, even this out a little bit, get it trimmed up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got this part pretty well trimmed up. I've taken the fat off of the point. As you can see, there's a lot of fat in here. It's a totally different type of a muscle. It doesn't need the protection that the flat does. This thing is gonna, the fat in here is gonna render down. It's gonna make this thing juicy no matter what you do. I'm gonna leave the fat on this part here to help protect the meat from drying out as we cook it. And again, you can just see the transformation in the direction of the grains. We've got this going this way. This other muscle is going this way. And you can kind of see here the separation point. Once this cooks and once this renders, you can just take a knife and follow along here, and this is going to come right off. I could do it right now. I've done it before that way and separate the point from the flat, but I'm going to go ahead and cook them as one. So we're going to go ahead and season this up. Yeah, it looks like the butcher got a little notch there, but that's okay. And I'll get this seasoned up. I am going to inject it first. So when I inject, you can either inject with the grain or across the grain. The point really doesn't need injected. I probably will inject it with a little bit, but I kind of think of it as a bunch of garden hoses running all in a line. And if you inject with the grain, you're filling one garden hose. But if you go across the grain and you puncture them all, and then as you pull out, it's going to tend to fill all those garden hoses at the same time. So I prefer to go across the grain when I inject. And then if you have any injection left over, it's okay to go ahead and fill in. We'll do about every inch, and we'll get to that here in a second. Okay, so I mixed up my injection. For this one I use Cosmos Q's. This is a brisket injection. You can use beef broth, consomme of beef. I don't want to get too much into the science, but you want to be careful what you put in this because the pH level can be really affected by some of the salt content in beef consomme, for example. So, and it can literally affect the flavor of the beef. You want the flavor of the beef to come out and be the star of the show. So I have 20 ounces here of just distilled water to a half a cup of my Cosmos Q's brisket injection. And what I'm going to do, I put this in a foil pan. If you've never done this before, you'll see why. We want to go in, and then the only time we inject is as we pull out of the meat. And we're going to do about every inch. So I'm going to go in and then gently inject as we pull out. If you put too much in, it's going to squirt. And I usually like to put my finger right on the hole, let it simmer down, and then go again. Again, I'm going across the grain. That's going to fill all those little garden hoses that go across there. And that fluid's going to spread out across the brisket. About every inch. And if you put too much in, trust me, this will squirt halfway across the kitchen. So be really careful with it. Get up in here. And you can kind of see it puff up. Well, because my hand's in the way you can't, but you'll see this. I'm going to try to keep my hand over here. This thing just actually puffs up with moisture. It's pretty lean in the flat, so it can take a lot of extra moisture. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this. There's no need for you to sit here and watch me do this, but just rinse, lather, repeat about every inch across, and I'll be right back. And then if I have any injection left over, I'll turn around and go ahead and put some in with the grain. Okay, so I've got this thing injected. I'm just going to get the excess off of here, just pat it down. Doesn't need to be too wet. I did inject the point a little bit. Sop up some of this extra injection in here. Get rid of that. And since I am going to put it that side down, I'm going to go ahead and season that side first. And again, I use this pan to help save the mess. Even though this fat's going to render and it's going to drip down, most of the rub I put on here is going to be lost, but it drips down on the diffuser plate, and it really helps that smoke come back up and give it a good flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and switch out my gloves here, and I'll be right back and we'll get this thing seasoned. Okay, so to season this, I'm going to use 3 different layers of seasoning. I'm going to go light with Cosmo's Cute Cow Cover Hot. This is basically a salt, pepper, garlic, and some other things. We're going to go pretty light with this coat. There's a lot of meat here. It can take a lot of seasoning, but we want to just kind of get this base layer of flavor down. Open this up, get some in here. Kind of pat that in. That's about enough for that. Next, I'm going to use Cosmo's Dirty Bird Hot. This has a lot of different seasonings in it. I'm going to go a little bit heavier with this. This is going to give it a nice color when it cooks. We don't want to go too awful heavy, but we want a pretty good coat on there. And again, I'm not going to go too much on the fat cap because it's going to, like I say, most of that's going to render off anyway. But on the point, I really want to get some of this flavor in here. Put that down in there like so. Get our edges. And then on top, I'm going to go with this is Killer Hog Steak Rub. A lot of different ways you can do a brisket. Texas style is 50% salt, 50% pepper, and you put it on heavy, and that's all you use. So this has some salt, pepper, bunch of different flavors in it, but it's a little beefier. It's a little chunkier, I guess you'd say. So this will give it a nice texture. So when the bark builds, and when I say bark, sometimes briskets can almost look burnt when you pull them off the smoker before you do the wrap. And that's going to provide that crunchy layer of flavor. And I'm going to cook this to color. One of the questions I often get asked is, how long do you cook this before you wrap it? And there is no magic answer to that. It depends on the temperature you're going to use. There's hot and fast. Some people will cook these things at 300 degrees until they get the bark, wrap it, and then we're going to go to a texture inside. Some people will go 180 degrees, cook it longer. I'm probably going to cook this one at about 250 for the first 4 or 5 hours. And then once it gets the color I like, I may go ahead and turn it up just a little bit, because I don't, the only reason I got one this big, it was an 18.5 pounder, was because the flat was a pretty consistent thickness all the way through. Sometimes when you look at briskets in the store, they get really thin down on the flat part, which makes it harder to cook them consistently. So out of the 3 I had to choose from, I like this the best, and brisket freezes really well. So once again, I'm going to start with the cow cover, just a kind of a light coat. And by layering these flavors, it really gives it a profile when you bite through it that's very complex, I guess you'd say. Can't believe I'm using a term like that, but I don't do competitions, but that's one of the things when you're in a competition that I'm told you want. You know, you have 50 different people all turning in brisket. You want yours to be just a little bit different, a little bit unusual. A judge is only going to take 1 bite. Now I'm going to go with the Dirty Bird Hot. A judge is only going to take 1 bite. So you really want to wow them. You want to blow their head off. But for a backyard like this, heck, it's all good. There's no right way, no wrong way. And I, again, am certainly not an expert, as you can see with my knife skills. But I've done this quite a few times. And putting 3 different rubs on really brings out a good flavor. So I'm going to go a little bit heavier with this, not a lot. I'd say medium. A light coat on the first coat, medium coat on the second coat, and then a light coat on the last coat. And I am going to wait and put this on the Rectech tomorrow. So it's going to sit overnight and have a chance to soak in these flavors. And you can just see by looking at this the different texture it has. It's also going to have a tendency to brown up and make that bark that you're looking for. The way I'm going to test it, how can I tell when it's ready to wrap? When I can kind of scratch the surface and the bark stays there and it doesn't scrape off. The tenderizing process is going to happen after we wrap it and put it back on the smoker. So we're going to give this a pretty liberal coat of this. And I don't really rub it, I more just pat it down. And again, the foil pan helps the mess. So I'm going to put this in the fridge tonight. I'm going to let it sit there uncovered. And probably going to get up around 5:30 in the morning, get it on. And I don't know, it's going to take probably between 10 and 12 hours. But we're going to get some delicious flat out of this. I'm going to make burn ends, which that'll be a different part of the video. And well, we'll see you bright and early in the morning. Hey everybody, quick update on this video. I started to edit my brisket cook, including the trim, injection, and cook, and it just got too long. It was already 25 minutes long and I hadn't even gotten into the cook part yet. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, just with the brisket trim. Many of you already know how to do that. There's hundreds of videos on how to do that. So just skip it entirely or fast forward through it, whatever you want to do. And I'm going to go ahead and put this up today, and then tomorrow I'll go ahead and post the actual cook and taste. So thanks again for watching. If you're so inclined, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.